So therefore, thanks a lot, Ozgur Koca, for being here. I was just going through your book. It's a wonderful book which talks about the Islamic rationalist disciplines, which are hardly discussed these days. What we have is pure theology. For those who don't know, Ozgur Koca is a prominent scholar from USA. He's the assistant professor of Islamic studies and philosophy at the Bayan Claremont Islamic Graduate School in California. His book, which has been published this year by the Cambridge University Press, is titled Islam, Causality and Freedom from the Medieval to the Modern Era. It basically discusses several, what you call, philosophical issues, I must say. When some of the titles that there, the chapters that talk, that are there in the book are toward a synthesis of Aristotelian Neoplatonic understandings of causality. He discusses various Islamic scholars like Ibn Sina, Ghazali, and Nursi, and also Jurjani and Mullah Sadra, and a host of wonderful scholars. And in fact, I would I'm waiting to hear from him on the famous debate, or maybe the posthumous kind of debate between Ibn Rushd and Al-Ghazali. When Ibn Rushd responded to Al-Ghazali's book on called Tahafat al-Falasifa, he responded with his own book called Tahafat al-Tahafa. So I'm sure Ozgur would give us an enlightening insight into that. So the basic things, although this is rooted in philosophy, I'm sure Ozgur will make it simple enough for for those participants who are not fully conversant with the terminologies of philosophy, because he talks about occasionalism and Aristotelian school, the peripatetic school, which Suharwardi kind of represented. All these things are quite academic in a sense that the normal reader might find it difficult. Therefore, I'm sure Ozgur will make it simple enough for those people who are not initiated into philosophical discussions. So we look forward to an enlightening discussion, friends. And thank you so much again for being here, Ozgur. And over to you, please carry on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'll try my best to make this accessible.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
But let me try then.
Yeah.
So some to be invited and be speaking to an audience, an interested audience. Thanks for the invitation again. And as Fazil Rahman said, in this book I examined different accounts of causality formulated by Muslim theologians and philosophers and Sufis and mystics, if you will. So on the one hand, I'm looking at certain prominent theologians, such as Ghazali, Farid Razi, and Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani, and Sayyid Nursi and others. There are several prominent theologians, mutakallimun, if you will, that I'm looking at in this book. Also looking at philosophers. Philosophers such as Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd. Perhaps Mullah Sadra and Suhrawardi also can be included in that category, but usually, in the tradition, Mullah Sadra and Suhrawardi are referred to as being, among the Ishraqiyun, right? The illuminationists. So, but I believe, the categories are quite, interpenetrating. I think it's hard to make such neat and watertight categories between, these people. So I always wanted to be careful about that. But still, I think there are certain tendencies that we can identify. So Suhrawardi and Mullah Sadra also looked at Sufis, also the Sufi metaphysicians, if you will, Sufi metaphysics. That was my interest. So to understand what is going on in that domain, I looked at Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi famous Ibn Arabi and some of his students, such as Dawood al-Qaysari and Sadr ibn Qanabi. So my book actually is looking at philosophy and theology and spirituality, and how within these domains the question of causality was understood. And towards the end of the book, in the last chapter, in fact, I have a background in physics and math. I taught physics and mathematics for many years in different parts of the world. So I also wanted, that was my interest from the beginning, the relationship between philosophy, religion, and
I think, Ozgur, you have been disconnected, kind of.
Religion and science debate.
Yeah, we can see you now. Yes.
Did you hear what I just?
Yeah, I think we lost you for a minute, and perhaps if you can repeat that, and also if you can simplify. If you can explain to the audience what causality means and what occasionalism means before if you go into it, that will be good.
Yeah, I will do that. So causality is this, is the understanding between cause and effect. Now, how do you understand from a religious perspective? Was my question here. So, the relationship between cause and effect. How is that happening? For example, I am right now speaking, right? So if you think about it, this is something extraordinary, because right now I'm just trying to say some words, and I just think about that, and somehow my whole body is participating in this process. My brain, my tongue here, billions of activities, chemical, molecular, atomic, subatomic activities are happening in my body right now, so that I'm able to speak. So how do you really understand that relationship between thought and your body's participation in that thought? So how do you really connect these dots? That is questions like this. That is, what I was interested in. In fact, actually, as David Hume once said, it is not any less strange that I am able to speak than just by thinking moving a mountain. Say, I'm moving a mountain by just thinking about it. That would be a miracle. Perhaps people would call it a miracle. I call it an extraordinary event, at least, right? And right now I am speaking to you. That is no less strange than that. Start thinking about this. That really an interesting question. The relationship between cause and effect. Also, the relationship between cause and effect, any cause and any effect. You put. I'm raising my hand right now, right? From a religious person, what is really going on here? How do you understand the presence of the divine in this act, the presence of God in this act? Religiously, that was the main question. So, occasionalism. Occasionalism is an understanding.
Your connection is breaking. Your connection is breaking. Perhaps some connect. Is there any connectivity issue there? Perhaps, I don't know.
No, yeah, and I'm the only one using the internet right now.
Okay.
In the house, I'm usually my connection is usually okay, but I.
Okay, I think.
Well,
I think we can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about the inconvenience.
No. Sometimes it happens. Even I had a tough time joining.
So what is this relationship between cause and effect? Is this relationship between cause and effect necessary or contingent? Means not necessary. The relationship between cause and effect, is it necessary? If that relationship is necessary, how do you understand miracles or some extraordinary events happening in the world? Or to what extent do humans have causal efficacy? That's another question related to this whole discussion. Or how can one square the divine will, knowledge, and omnipotence of God with human freedom, right? That's another thing. So how do you understand human freedom, human agency is deeply related. How you understand causal relationships in the world. These and similar questions are fundamentally important for any religion for many reasons, of course, right? And how do you establish human agency? And how do you, how do you really construct a theologically and philosophically sound worldview? So the question of causality appears to be at the bottom of this whole discussion. Also, one other thing is that the relationship between religion and science also was deeply related to how you understand causality. So when you how should we how should I so say it briefly? So when you look at the the discussion between contemporary discussion between religion and science, something that we see is that this discussion is boiling down on how one understands causal relationships. So scientifically speaking, right, anybody who is studying science will start from the assumption that mostly actually this is how it's being done mostly. Anybody who is studying science will start from the assumption that the world is a causally closed system, self-explanatory and causally closed system. So religions, claim that God is present within this whole system, right? And also there are miracles, which means there are some breaks in causal chains, right? So how do you reconcile these two? I believe when the relationship, to solve the problem or to ease the tension between religion and science, one of the most important things is to come up with theories of causality which can actually answer this question. How do you really reconcile that scientific assumption that the world is a causally closed system, and religious worldview has this assumption that the God is present in this causally closed system. Also, sometimes, for most people at least, sometimes these causal chains are broken. So the relationship between religion and science, or the debate between religion and science, seems to be boiling down to this question as well. So that's what causality is in as far as I understand. Occasionalism is a particular. So I let me put it this way: I examine several theories of causality in the Islamic tradition. Several, not only occasionalism. Occasionalism is one of the most dominant ways of understanding causal relationships in the world, and thanks to the Asharite school, as if that is the official doctrine of Asharite school when it comes to causality. And occasionalism means it is God who creates cause and effect. And it is God who connects them on a self-imposed habitual pattern, which is also called a habit or ada or sunnatullah or adatullah. So there is this self-imposed habitual pattern in the world. Therefore, there's consistency in the world, and it is God who creates cause and effect. So when when I'm speaking to you, going back to our example, it is God who creates every step of this activity, every step, from my thought until my speech, and when you hear it, and every part of this chain, what had just happened, is created directly by God. Okay, so cause and effect are created. So and their relationships, that's one thing that they say. Cause and effect are created by God, and they are being attached to each other by a self-imposed habitual pattern. So there is no causal glue in the world, if you will. There is no causal glue. So it is only God's sustenance which connects them. And these relationships, therefore, between cause and effect are not necessary, which means they can be broken. So, so it is easy to say that it is not necessary, it can be broken, but it leads to a completely different worldview and a completely different understanding of, science, one's relationship between God, God and man relationship, God and cosmos relationship, and everything else. So was that clear for occasionalism? It is God who creates cause and effect. And it is God who attaches them to each other. And the relationship between cause and effect is not necessary. It is possible, it is contingent. What is that? Is that clear enough? Or should I just continue?
No, I think it's okay. I mean, I think.
Okay, we can explore actually, since
yeah.
I'm going to try to keep it short, my presentation, so that we can have time for questions and answers.
Yes, that's true.
And we can explore it together.
Yes, why not? Inshallah.
Okay. So that's what occasion. There's also participatory theories of causality, which I call it in a participatory. I believe this is the first time that I am calling it as participatory. This is not what we find in Mutakallimun, among the theologians. In the Kalam tradition, occasionalism dominates. But when you go to philosophy and spirituality, falsafa and Sufism, tasawwuf, right? When you are in these domains, another theory of causality seems to be more dominant, which I call participatory theories of causality. The difference between the two is that Ash'arism sees a sharp distinction between God and the world, and then attributes the creation of cause and effect to God directly, right, as I said. And this is the difference here is that when we see Islamic philosophy and Sufism, they start from the question of existence, which the question of wujud, if you will. So the analyzing the question of wujud and mahiyya, which means quiddity or essence. So the analysis of this is their starting point. And this analysis usually takes them to remove a sharp distinction between God and the world. And they establish human freedom as a form of participation in divine freedom. We are free because of, and we are causal efficacy because of our participation in divine causality. And we are free because of our participation in divine freedom. So removing this sharp distinction between God and the world by starting from the concept of existence, wujud, is leading them to a very different understanding of causality. Is actually leading them to a highly different worldview, and which can be identified as distinct from Kalam tradition here. So that's, Islamic philosophy and Sufism appears to be closer to each other. They actually come together on this and many similar questions. So there's that continuity between Islamic philosophical and spiritual traditions, not much so in the theological tradition. So that's one thing that I also learned during the study. Islamic spirituality also seems to be closer to Islamic philosophy on many questions than Kalam tradition. So, by the way, perhaps I should also answer this question briefly. Why? What else made me study this topic? The question of causality. There are several things, as I said. One of them is the debate between religion and science. Debate between religion and science seems to be boiling down the question of causality, and I try to look at that. Secondly, one's conception of causality also shapes one's understanding of God and cosmos relationship, because this is how you find the presence of God in the world, in fact. And also it shapes your relationship, your personal relationship with God, And this affects in what psychology you pray to God, for example. Your understanding of causality really affects in what psychology and in what way you pray to God, or you feel the closeness, the divine immanence in God. So if you think of God as in deism, for example, as a distant God, removed from the world, having no presence or having no influence on relationships, causal relationships in the world, so you're having a distant God, removed from the world, over there, perhaps created and just left it, or like a clock, if you will. So that type of relationship is a result of a particular understanding of causality. But if you have, like occasionalists or like Sufis and Muslim philosophers, like a God which is present in the world through existence, or through, as occasionalist says, creating cause and effect at all times and creating the world anew at each time. So you are in the midst of very robust presence of divine in the world. So that's so it affects your relationship with God. So another thing is that one can say, it has applications from logic to many other fields. I mean, how you understand logical relationships in the world, and if I may briefly say, the classical logic tells us that that the consistent sequential relationships between cause and effect constitute a valid basis for demonstrative syllogisms or logic. But Ash'arite occasionalism removes that relationship between cause and effect. And hence, it leads to a rejection of logic in some cases. Especially you can see this, although he was not an Ash'arite, in Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah's book Raddul Mantaqiyin. He in fact uses Ash'arite occasionalism to remove the trustability of logic, or to attack logicians, if you will. So it actually starts from the question of causality when he is writing that book. So it has implications for discussions on logic. It has implications for discussions on religion and science. It has implications for spirituality, feeling the divine presence in the world. It has implications in many fields. Also, it has implications on how you establish human agency. To what extent, we are participants in this world, and we're creating ourselves, or to what extent we have freedom, if you will. So this is theologically important, but also socially and politically important. If you think about the contemporary state of Muslim world, and or the understanding of Qadar, right, the predestination, pre-knowledge of God. Are we just helpless leaves before the winds of the world, or we are really really have power to change it? So these are theological and metaphysical questions, as I examined in the book. However, they also have political and social implications for the Muslim world, and how you establish human agency and human freedom, and that's also have a lot to do with the question of causality and how you understand it. So things like this, they made me study this topic, and I spent some time. So it allowed me to delve deeply into different fields, from theology and falsafa and Sufism. And if you were wondering why I chose these people, Ghazali, Razi, Ibn Arabi, and others, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd. The reason that I chose these people, there are several reasons. First of all, these exceptional figures have long received and will likely continue to see extensive attention throughout the Muslim world. they are prominent figures. So their viewpoints are particularly significant. And they also are representatives of different tendencies within Islamic intellectual history. As I said, Ghazali, early Asharite theologians, I look at also early Asharite theologians in the first chapter, and Mu'tazilite theologians. There's a lot of study on Mu'tazilite theology as well in the first chapter. So these people are regarded as mutakallimun, right? So I wanted to have certain people from that domain. I also wanted to have some people who can represent the philosophical tradition, such as Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd. And also wanted to have some people who can represent Sufi tradition. Also, right? So I had Ibn Arabi and Konevi and Dawud al-Qaisari, that's which can represent that Sufi metaphysics there. I also wanted to have some people from the Ishraqiyun, from the Illuminationist tradition. So I had Mullah Sadra and Suhrawardi from that tradition. So I wanted to have this diversity. I wanted to have this difference, and I wanted to be able to get a fuller picture. But of course, I'm not saying that this is an exhaustive study. A lot needs to be done to do justice to a topic as complex as this one. Also, I believe that all of the people that I'm studying in this book, they are actually making some real contributions to the discussion. So it's like a question that is evolving and being revisited and understood differently. So it's one of the things that I also learned when I'm studying, when I'm writing this book, is that the Islamic philosophy and Islamic philosophical thought and Islamic thought it is not, I think, it is wrong to understand it in stages. Like it has a golden era, then it is, it has, not an era which is not bright. I mean, it's like this sharp historical distinctions is not helpful really. What I saw is that a continuation of a debate, throughout centuries, from the beginning till the end, as if the different applications, different concepts which are being produced, offered, rediscussed, revisited. It's a continuous debate almost. I mean, it's a continuous and lively, and also which is being reapplied again and again in different paradigms. In the medieval period, when it's in the Aristotelian context, it's in the Ptolemaic astronomy, when we see this shift from one scientific paradigm to others, we also see different applications of these theories of causality in these different scientific paradigms, from the Ptolemaic Aristotelian paradigm of science to more Newtonian, more modern scientific paradigm. And even after that, with the quantum physics, perhaps, if there's another shift there, you see real reapplications and revisitation of these topics. So it's a lively debate. That's, I believe, what I am trying to say, and it's not stopping. It cannot be understood. So I think there, it shows that Islamic intellectual tradition, at least on certain questions, it seems to be continuing and keep that lively and vibrant attitude. So, so that was another thing that I learned. I believe that was an important discovery for me. If you are wondering, what I did, in these chapters. So, I tried to answer 2 questions so far, and perhaps 3. Right? I just gave you a short summary. Also, I told you why I chose this topic and why I chose these things. Okay. And thirdly, let me give you a short summary of what I did in the chapters. In the chapter 1, I explored the development of Mu'tazilite and Ash'arite theories of causality. The focus, of course, on theological terms and philosophical underpinnings. So there's a very close relationship, as I find it there. There's a very close relationship between the early schools, between Ash'arite and Mu'tazilite theology, and how they understood divine attributes and the relationship between divine attributes and God. This famous discussion on the created, the Quran, right? Whether the Quran is created or uncreated. It was part of a discussion on the divine attributes in the early period. And this discussion, in fact, has a lot of effect and an influence on how Mu'tazilite and Ash'arite theologians develop their theories of causality. Excuse me. So what I saw here, again, that was quite an exploration, quite a discovery for me. Mu'tazilite and Ash'arite theology there seems to be diverging from each other on two important concepts. Ash'arite theology is moving towards cause and effect relationship as if they are like possible, they are not necessary. Mu'tazilite theology, because of its more rationalistic tendency, accept the necessity between cause and effect relationships. So these two concepts, necessity and possibility, seems to be two key words for us to understand the tendencies of Mu'tazilite theology and the tendencies of Ash'arite theology. For Ash'arite theology, the fundamental question was the divine freedom to protect the divine will. So fa'alun lima yurid, for them, right? God does whatever God wishes, right? So there is it was this for them that was the central axis around which everything else revolves. For Mu'tazilite theology, Mu'tazilite theology is allowing to impose certain necessities on the divine essence, right? So there are certain, but this necessity for them is not really taking away the divine perfection, of course. So there is that that concept between necessity and possibility. So let me keep it brief. If you guys are interested in knowing more, perhaps you can ask questions and we can explore it more together. In chapter 2, I examined Ibn Sina, his account of causality and freedom. So I am offering an analysis of the concept of existence, wujud, and essence, mahiyya, and explore how these concepts allow him to approach the question of causality from both physical and metaphysical perspectives. And he, in fact, and I argue this in this book, he in fact synthesizes, integrates Aristotelian and Neoplatonic currents, understandings of it. Kind of, he creates this system, a larger system, a grand system, and he kind of brings the two together with the help of these two concepts, wujud, existence, and mahiyya, essence. By the way, the term wujud I'll be using this in this discussion. It means, I translated that as existence. Sometimes it is translated as being, right? Just being, absolute and pure being. I'm not talking about here, by the way, and this is an important point. I'm not talking about beings. I'm not talking about mawjud. We are mawjud, right? We are beings. I am a being, you're a being, right? We are beings with us. We are existing beings, right? But I'm here, the term wujud is just referring, being qua being. I mean, right? This existence, pure and simple. We exist, and everything else also exists. It's the most absolute and universal category. You cannot really step out of it, right? So it is this, it's highly abstract and philosophically difficult concept to process, but it is fundamentally important for not only Ibn Sina, but also following philosophical and spiritual traditions. It is also important for in a post-Avicennian, in a post-Ibn Sina Kalam tradition. You can see extensive discussions on the question of wujud in Kalam books as well. But for Islamic spirituality, for Sufism and Falsafa, that is the central axis around which everything else revolves. So it's the question of causality also is being put in the larger context of the discussions on wujud and the divine existence, the divine wujud, right, and also our existence. So the relationship between the two. Again, if you would like to explore this more, you can ask questions. Okay, that is chapter 2. And chapter 3, well, I'm now looking at the Kalam tradition and looking at the Ghazali's and Razi's response to Ibn Sina. So Ibn Sina was saying something and attacking, in fact, certain parts of the cosmology of Kalam, right? This atomist cosmology, like atoms. So Ibn Sina is attacking certain aspects of this, and Ghazali and Razi responding to him. So I examined those discussions. In fact, actually, that was again a discovery for me. When Razi, someone like Razi, was responding to Ibn Sina, their response is leading them to quite an interesting philosophy of science. They usually use Euclidean geometry, Euclidean geometry that we teach in our math classes, right? They usually use Euclidean geometry, which was known to them, either for or against atomism. So for Ibn Sina is using Euclidean geometry to attack atomism, and Razi is using again Euclidean geometry to defend atomism. And then Razi reaches the conclusion that, and he says, look, Euclidean geometry can be used for and against atomistic worldview. Hence, he says, this scientific theory is allowing itself to be read in multiple ways, in multiple philosophical and theological ways. Hence, he reaches quite a skeptic and pragmatic view of science. On the one hand, scientific theories are useful descriptions, an approximate description of the world. But on the other hand, they are lending themselves to be read differently. Hence, we shouldn't allow them to really change certain theological convictions that we have. That was his conclusion. And we should just use them as pragmatic tools, right? This was quite a pragmatic and highly skeptic view of science. That was what I saw in Razi. And Ghazali's defense, by the way, occasionalism, is not really going into discussions on atomism. He's just having this theological rejection in his text of the divine will. And Ghazali says, Ibn Sina and others, when they talk about the necessity between cause and effect, they are in fact losing the divine will and freedom. And he doesn't have quite good things to say about them, right? I mean, you know that he was quite reproachful when in his Tafat. There are also other things that's happening in that in the Tafat, such as the eternity of the world. But all of them appears to be stemming from this concern of Al-Ghazali to preserve the divine will and divine freedom. So that was Al-Ghazali there, and Razi also in the same chapter. And Razi's discovery there, this science as a how should we put it, like a science as a tool, as a collection of theories which allow themselves to be read from different theological and philosophical perspectives. This can be likened to the modern different philosophical and theological readings of the quantum physics, in fact. There are many books out there which read the quantum physics from a more undeterministic, non-deterministic perspective, but also there are people who think it's actually, in fact, a deterministic theory. So, and then on the basis of that, there are a lot of philosophical and theological extrapolations from that theory. I believe that reflects something like similar, that what someone like Razi discovered in Euclidean geometry. Okay, let me move on. Also, in chapter 4, I look at Ibn Rushd, and Ibn Rushd's response to Ghazali. I believe Fazlur Rahman was more interested in hearing this, about this more. So Ibn Rushd responds to Al-Ghazali and Al-Ghazali's challenges to Ibn Sina, right? Ibn Rushd is quite an interesting figure. I believe he, in many questions, he's giving us a quite, very, very strong answers, in fact. His criticism of Ash'ari occasionalism was, in fact, quite strong. We can discover it, and we can look at it together again. By the way, he, in many ways, he's agreeing with Ibn Sina. Also, he towards the end, he also moves towards, in fact, he himself acknowledges that he moves through Sufi metaphysics. And it was interesting for me to see Ibn Rushd himself was declaring that his view of Sufi metaphysics and how he actually himself see a very close relationship between his theory and what's happening in that domain. So we can look at that as well if you are interested. So then I turn into Sohrawardi in chapter 5. And his account of causality. So when it comes to in the Ishraqiyun, the illuminations, Sohrawardi was considered as part of that school, right? Ishraqiyun. One of the things that we need to understand is the concept of light is very important for them, and the use of light analogy to understand the God and cosmos relationship. So as if we are. God is the absolute light, right? As if we are like this eroded lights, and somewhere between absolute darkness and absolute light, as if this shadowy quality. And on the basis of that, they also establish human agency, and in a quite similar way, actually, as if the concept of light is replacing the concept of existence and wujud. But many things are very similar between Ishraqiyun and the Falsafa and Sufi tradition. And even in Arabi, famous Ibn Arabi, I tried to look at it. Ibn Arabi is a thinker sometimes, right? He's not very systematic, but I mean, he can be understood, I guess, in once you spend enough amount of time. It took me some time to really enter into his role. But I think it was worth it. I mean, he's really quite strong. I mean, in many ways, he's quite mesmerizing, in fact. So describes the regularity. So and Ibn Arabi has a lot to say about this important issue as well. And then I look at his students, Sufi metaphysics, Konevi and Dawud. When I look at Dawud, we also kind of saw another thing. There are continuities in Sufi metaphysics as well. So when we see, Sufi metaphysics as if this is like a one thing, right? But there are like diversities, diverse opinions, certain divergences. Someone like Rumi, right? This famous Sufi poet, right? And someone like Ibn Arabi. So there are certain but mostly they agree. But yes, there are certain issues that they and then I move towards in chapter 8, Jurjan says Sharif al-Jurjani. This is now this is now we are in the 13th century now, 14th century, and we're moving right. And Jurjani was one of the most important Ash'ari theologians, and he in his book, he's kind of transforming occasionalism, from a theory of causality into a central axis of all theological thought. As if, this now, okay, to understand Ash'ari theology and its development throughout centuries, it is, and I came to this conclusion, it is necessary to understand occasionalism and its implications. Ash'ari occasionalism, Ash'ari understanding of cause and effect relationship and its implications. And they are applying this logic from eschatology, from the understanding of hereafter, to prophetology, to understanding of prophets, from ethics, from ethics, from morality to divine ethics. I mean, they apply this question to all theology. They apply this logic of occasionalism to all theology. The logic that I mean here, the relationship between cause and effect is not necessary. It is possible. So that is that what we see a lot in the medieval period. Again, another thing that Giorgiani does quite distinctly is that he again follows Razi there in developing a critical philosophy of science. But this time he's not only applying it by starting from the Euclidean geometry, but also he's extending that criticism of Razi to Aristotelian and Ptolemaic natural philosophy and science. So chapter 9 looks at Molla Sadra. That's what Molla Sadra is a famous philosopher. Quite late now. We are in the late period, and he's very rich. Sadra's rich metaphysical treatment of the concept of existence, again very similar to Sufi metaphysics and Islamic philosophy, establishes causal efficacy and freedom of beings and entities through the expansion of wujud and through the participation of existence, if you will. And chapter 10 does something interesting, I believe. Now I look at the contemporary period, and chapter 10 looks at Said Nursi, a famous contemporary Muslim thinker who lived in Turkey in the 20th century. Was very influential, and I wanted to look at something more contemporary as well, just to show the continuity of this discussion and its different applications. So Nursi can in fact be called a neo-occasionalist. He makes some original contributions as well, as I argue. He wants to create this synthesis between Kalam and Sufi metaphysics, Ibn Arabi's theory of divine names and divine self-disclosure. So his whole thought, suggests an interesting meet between Kalam and Tasawwuf. So in that chapter, I look at Said Nursi, a modern thinker, and he kind of applied also the occasionalist logic in the context of modern science. So I wanted to have that meeting as well between modern scientific challenges, if you will, and how a more traditional person, by starting from Kalam and Tasawwuf, can answer some of those challenges. So in chapter 11, I kind of that was the chapter. Actually, in fact, wanted to write from the beginning, right? In there, I apply, and I step back from the specifics of the discussion, and I examine strengths and weaknesses of various proposed theories of causality in the face of contemporary philosophical challenges. So as a case study, I look at the contemporary debate between religion and science. That's what I do. In that chapter, actually, I kind of propose my own thoughts as well. I mean, in the previous chapters, I tried to understand, a critical study of, what those people were saying. I want to really understand them. And then in the last chapter, I'm kind of applying what I learned to a modern debate. also examine also certain, from my perspective, of course, certain weaknesses and strengths of these doctrines and these theories. And in the conclusion, I give a short analysis and a brief summary. I also repeat some of the salient features of the occasionalist and participatory accounts of causality. That was the book, and that was, those were some of the reasons that they led me to write this book. But I learned a lot. I really enjoyed studying these giants, all of them. From the Kalam tradition to philosophy to Sufi, these are like giants, really. Mesmerizing journey, in fact, that I loved it. And let me stop here, and if you guys have any questions, we can continue.